Today we will talk about Ecclesiastes, starting from chapter 1. Chapter 1, Awakening. We will read verse by verse, accompanied with some explanations. Later, we will provide more detailed explanations. Chapter 1, verse 1. The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. David's son is King Solomon, who was a great king in Israel. Chapter 1, verse 2. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. This is the Chinese version. Upon seeing it, we find it hard to understand. So we refer to the English version. The English version says, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. In Ecclesiastes, the original Hebrew word in the opening paragraph is Hevel, which means smoke or vapor. Ecclesiastes starts with this topic, which is translated as void in Chinese and meaningless in English. In the Chinese Union version of the Bible, it's translated as void, which is definitely incorrect and makes it hard to understand. A more accurate and comprehensive translation could be impermanent, illusory, and meaningless. Now, let's analyze it. Smoke, by nature, is impermanent, eventually vanishing into nothingness. What is void? Void is nothingness. Impermanence means from existence to non-existence, or from non-existence to existence. Permanence means remaining changeless. Smoke is changing moment by moment, which makes us feel the momentary impermanence. Hevel, besides impermanence, also has another meaning: mysterious, incomprehensible, and inconceivable. Therefore, a comprehensive translation of this verse would be, the teacher says, all things are impermanent, mysterious, illusory, incomprehensible, and inconceivable. It's meaningless to chase these smoke-like worldly things. This is the full meaning of this verse. Chapter 1, verse 3. What does man gain from all his labour at which he toils under the sun? Chapter 1, verse 4. Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. Chapter 1, verse 5. The sun rises and the sun sets, and hurries back to where it rises. Chapter 1, verse 6. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. Chapter 1, verse 11. There is no remembrance of men of old, and even those who are yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow. Chapter 1, verse 14. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are impermanent, illusory, and meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Chapter 1, verse 16. I thought to myself, look, I have grown and increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Chapter 2, verse 1. I thought in my heart, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good." But that also proved to be impermanent, illusory, and meaningless. Chapter 2, verse 3. I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was worthwhile for men to do under heaven during the few days of their lives. Chapter 2, verse 4. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. Chapter 2, verse 5. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. Chapter 2, verse 6. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. Chapter 2, verse 7. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. He was very rich. Chapter 2, verse 8. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired men and women singers and a harem as well, the delights of the heart of man. Chapter 2, verse 9. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. Chapter 2, verse 10. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my work, and this was the reward for all my labor. Chapter 2, verse 11. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was impermanent, illusory, and meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Chapter 2, verse 12. Then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom, and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? Chapter 2, verse 13. I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. Chapter 2, verse 14. The wise man has eyes in his head, while the fool walks in the darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. Chapter 2, verse 15. Then I thought in my heart, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said in my heart, this too is impermanent, illusory, and meaningless. Chapter 2, verse 16. For the wise man, like the fool, will not be long remembered. In days to come, both will be forgotten. Like the fool, the wise man too must die. Chapter 2, verse 17. So I hated life, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is impermanent, illusory, and meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Chapter 2, verse 18. I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. Chapter 2, verse 19. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool? Yet he will have control over all the work into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is impermanent, illusory, and meaningless. Chapter 2, verse 20. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labour under the sun. Chapter 2, verse 21. For a man may do his work with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then he must leave all he owns to someone who has not worked for it. Chapter 2, verse 22. What does a man get for all the toil and anxious striving with which he labours under the sun? Chapter 2, verse 23. All his days his work is pain and grief. Even at night his mind does not rest. Faced with these impermanent and illusory worldly matters, those who are caught up in gains and losses feel desperate and meaningless. Chapter 2, verse 25. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? Chapter 2, verse 26. To the man who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. But to the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is impermanent, illusory, and meaningless, a chasing after the wind. This means even wisdom is meaningless. In summary, Chapter 2 tells us that everything accumulated by the wise will eventually be left to the foolish. It is futile. Both the wise and the foolish will eventually die. In this regard, there is no difference. No matter how smart, noble, or blessed you are, your ending will be the same as the foolish or even the animals. All of us will eventually die and be forgotten. All these are impermanent, illusory, and meaningless, like chasing after the wind. This is essentially the original text. I didn't provide too much explanation because the literal meaning is pretty easy to understand. However, we still need to delve deeper. In fact, this paragraph carries profound meanings. After saying so much, the author eventually had a helpless feeling because he felt life is meaningless. Of course, later he mentioned that we need to fear God because only God knows the meaning of everything. If you don't fear God, then even though you have realized to this point, you still can't find the meaning of life, as everything is so impermanent. Now, let's analyze the two words, Hevel and meaningless, carefully. In fact, all things arising from causes and conditions are impermanent by nature. We need to take some time to explain this principle, as it's not easy to understand. Let's talk about causes and conditions. For example, in the causes and conditions that give rise to a sprout, the seed is the cause, and the appropriate climate, water, soil, sunlight, etc., which the planting relies on, are called conditions. The process of planting is called the combination of causes and conditions. The resulting sprout is called a thing arising from causes and conditions, or simply a conditioned thing. The sprout is not something that originally existed. Rather, it arises after a seed is planted with various conditions, such as water and soil. Originally it didn't exist, but suddenly it appears. This is called arising. After the sprout arises in the first moment, it ceases without even abiding for a while. Hence, it is impermanent. Since it disappears in a moment like lightning, it is certainly not permanent, as permanent means changeless. It only appears for a moment, so it is impermanent. This is impermanence on a microscopic level, as it changes in a moment. This not only applies to sprouts, but to all things arising from causes and conditions. They are all constantly changing, like a flowing river. None of them lasts for more than a moment, so they are all impermanent. This is a great truth that nobody can refute. Countless conditioned things are all momentary and impermanent. Now, let's further analyze it more precisely. Why are conditioned things arising and ceasing moment by moment? For example, when something hasn't arisen from causes and conditions, it's called unborn. It doesn't exist before the combination of causes and conditions. When the causes and conditions combine, it's established as the first moment of arising, called arisen. Moreover, from the very first moment of its arising, it directly ceases without even abiding for a while. This is called ceased. After ceasing, the second moment arises. Furthermore, each moment is a new cycle of arising and ceasing. When the causes and conditions are still present, its continuity continues. In the continuity, the objects in the former and latter moments are similar but not identical. Hence, it is called a continuity of similar type. By inference, this applies to everything in the world. However, due to the lack of wisdom, we consider these continuities permanent and changeless. When the causes and conditions for an object are absent, its continuity no longer continues, and the object appears to be gone. Consequently, we consider it ceased. Therefore, ignorant people cling to either permanence or nothingness. When we cling to permanence, it is actually impermanent. Everything is impermanent. When we cling to nothingness, it hasn't really ceased, but transforms into something else. Let's take another example to understand how impermanence is manifested in a flower, which arises from causes and conditions. If we replace something with a flower and causes and conditions with seed, water, soil, sunlight, time, climate, etc., we will have a concrete understanding. When the flower hasn't sprouted from the seed, water, and soil in the flower pot, there is no flower. It hasn't arisen. Now, the flower has blossomed. How is its journey? Looking ahead, when the causes and conditions haven't combined, there is indeed nothing. At the very moment when the causes and conditions such as seed, water, and soil combine, the flower suddenly appears. This is the first moment of the flower, and it ceases without even abiding in the first moment. In the following dozens of hours, the causes and conditions continue, so the continuity of the flower also continues moment by moment. This is how a flower exists in the conventional reality. Therefore, whether from a macroscopic or microscopic perspective, this flower is impermanent. This is a common law, a common nature. Impermanence universally applies to all things that arise from causes and conditions. This truth surpasses the knowledge of all scientists and religions and exceeds the cumulative achievements of all Nobel Prize winners over the past 100 years. The above reveals the common characteristic of all things that arise from causes and conditions, which is impermanence. Regarding this, we need to recognize 2 points: universality and momentariness. Universality means impermanence applies to all conditioned things. Momentariness means things arise and cease in a moment, without even abiding in the very first moment after arising. So, the opposite views are wrong views. If you use wrong views to comprehend the truth, it becomes an obstacle, a form of ignorance. Those who lack wisdom are ignorant. This wisdom may seem simple, but not many people truly understand this great truth. This principle seems simple. Based on the fact that all things will eventually cease, and there are various stages when their continuities abide, we can see that all things are impermanent on a macroscopic level. Additionally, we can also infer that all things are impermanent on a microscopic level. On a microscopic level, they are just momentary. Apart from the first moment of arising, if there were no other changes, that is, if it remained changeless in the first moment without ceasing, then there should be no ultimate cessation on a macroscopic level, and no differences in the middle. Hence, it should constantly abide as the first moment. However, this is not the case. In fact, all things will eventually cease, and they are also changing at different stages. Based on this, we can infer that on a microscopic level, all things must be arising and ceasing moment by moment. Otherwise, they will never cease, and we won't notice their changes on a macroscopic level as well. As we know, for instance, our nails and hair may not show visible changes over a short period. However, after a few days, or even within a day, you can feel their changes moment by moment on a microscopic level. With the changes in the first moment, there will be changes arising and ceasing in the second moment. In this way, the continuity keeps changing until it eventually ceases. Therefore, all things are impermanent on a microscopic level as well. However, ignorant people believe that all things are permanent from arising to cessation. This is just an illusion. Ignorant people cannot discern the subtle differences between former and latter moments of a continuity. Rather, they mistakenly perceive the former and latter moments as one entity. As a result, the illusion of permanence arises. This is the most common illusion for ordinary people who lack wisdom. This tells us that we cannot trust our perceptions. People tend to trust their senses, never realizing that there is already a mistake at the root of understanding. As a result, the mistake keeps going and continues forever. Not only do they fail to realize their mistake, but they also have arrogance higher than the sky and attachment stronger than diamonds. They believe themselves to be the greatest and smartest in the world. Nowadays, there are many arrogant people, whether in the scientific community or in church, that is, those who lack wisdom and don't understand the Bible. There are many such people. They believe themselves to be the greatest and smartest in the world, but in reality, they are ignorant. The attachment of permanence that considers everything as permanent is the biggest attachment of ignorant people. It creates illusions, making people feel that this illusory world is stable, solid, and there is something you can possess. In reality, this is a severe mental illness. Do you think you are a normal person? This is because we tend to regard whatever we see as permanent, and we have habituated ourselves to this attachment for too long. The source of all actions is understanding. Without correcting our wrong understanding in time, how can we stop the confused and repetitive pursuit of smoke? That's why the wise King Solomon sighed, feeling meaningless and helpless. If we are so wrong, we can't purify our minds and acts and can't stop meaningless pursuits. How can worldly people let go of their meaningless pursuits? King Solomon did have some realization. He shared this wisdom in the Old Testament for later generations to contemplate and learn, advising them not to be too attached to worldly things or their bodies and minds. Therefore, it's urgent to learn wisdom. Everyone needs to make effort on it. Let's analyze it further and take a look at the real world. In reality, whether it's the external world of mountains, rivers, and earth, or the internal body, consciousness, and senses, everything is arising and ceasing moment by moment, like flowing water and flickering flame. This is the real situation. From modern science, we know that matter is composed of molecules and atoms. An atom consists of a nucleus with protons and electrons, and protons are made up of quarks. Quarks are moving and unstable. Electrons can annihilate and transform into photons. Photons, which are moving waves, are also illusory. Therefore, all things are arising and ceasing at moment by moment, moving and changing. Our consciousness and senses are also arising, changing, and ceasing moment by moment. The world we see is far from the reality. How do we perceive the world? We believe our feet step on solid ground. But in reality, the ground is impermanent and will eventually cease. We believe we live in solid buildings, and both our body and consciousness are solid entities. How wrong we are. In reality, whether it's the external world of mountains, rivers, and earth, or the internal body and consciousness, everything is arising and ceasing moment by moment, like flowing water and flickering flame. In the blink of an eye, the world has already changed into a new scene. Between heaven and earth, the wind blows, the rain falls, and the weather changes. There is no stability at all. The entire world is like a flame, flickering, swaying, and constantly changing. Is there any permanence at all? If you reflect on your previous understanding in this way, you will come to realize that you have been confused and deluded, and there is already a severe problem in your mind. Looking back, have you ever done anything right? Yet this illusion of permanence is still haunting in your mind. You are suffering from a mental blindness and wearing a pair of sunglasses of permanence. No matter how hard you try, you cannot get rid of this solid illusion of permanence. Then look at people around you. They are all trapped in this illusion without realizing it. What they say, do, and think are all wrong. Rivers and flames are used as analogies, as they represent momentariness. After learning this truth, in our eyes, all things are impermanent, moment by moment. You will know that this is the formula of the universe with extreme dignity. With this understanding, we should know that for clouds, lightning, bubbles, and even all conditioned things, no matter how long they live on a macroscopic level, they are all momentary on a microscopic level. They are just continuities. No matter how long a continuity lasts, all things are equal in terms of being momentary. Eventually, all things will cease, so in this regard, they are equal. In our eyes, there seems to be huge differences among things in terms of characteristic, but that's because we lack wisdom. In reality, all things that arise from causes and conditions are momentary. This is a great unity. As King Solomon sighed, we humans are vastly different in terms of gender, age, appearance, personality, lifespan, wealth, and wisdom. However, all of us will eventually die, and all of us are momentary in nature. Therefore, if you understand impermanence on a microscopic level, you will know that all things in the universe are illusory. Okay, that's all for today.